So then, after Pluto was discovered, he was a planet for about 50 years as well. And then they realized he actually showed more similarities to the goddesses and the dwarf planets rather than the actual planets. So there was actually a really big fight that broke out where they really wanted to continue to use Pluto as a planet, especially astrologers at this point have really grown connected to Pluto. But even astrologers were using Ceres as a planet in that 50-year span that happened. So I think that's really important to note that literally they ended up demoting Pluto because they realized if they were going to consider Pluto a planet, then they actually had to consider the four goddesses planets. And that is the only
Mm.
reason Pluto's not a planet.
Welcome to Conversations with the Planets with Lori Kaufman and Alicia Cielle Heiser, a podcast that roots the wisdom of the stars into our lived experiences here on Earth and weaves the power of diverse healing modalities together with astrology.
I'm Lori Kaufman, an astrologer, tarot reader, writer, and teacher. I co-lead the Asteroid Special Interest Research Group for NCGR, an astrology organization, and I offer all different sorts of readings, online and in person.
I'm Alicia Cielle Heiser, an astrologer, herbalist, and witch living in Oregon on Kalapuya land, and I offer astrology consultations and teachings aimed at helping you honor your most authentic self and trust your intuition. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Conversations with the Planets. And today we're going to be starting off an Asteroids Fun Facts series that we are planning on recording several different episodes talking about just different fun facts related to the asteroids because Lori's been doing a lot of really incredible research about the asteroids with writing a book about the asteroids. And so, yeah, Lori, go ahead and take it away.
Yeah. Um, I've been really excited about this series for a long time. I have been making TikToks and I've been trying to share some of this research as it comes up. And as I just said in the last episode, I'll kind of reiterate this real quick. But as I started to restructure and edit my book, I realized that the astronomy is actually so important to understanding the richness of each asteroid, especially because we think about the astronomy so much when it comes to our actual planets and the
Mm-hmm.
transits and everything that's going on in our current cycles. Um, why wouldn't the asteroids be the same? And I started to notice some really crazy synchronicities in asteroid transits, which actually we should do an episode on asteroid transits too, because I've been collecting stories for that too.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I started adding an astronomy table, and anytime I found something interesting about the asteroid itself, its naming, why it was named that, why this or that, whatever, I started adding that into the book, and I do recommend listening to the last one first before coming back to this episode because that talks about the actual astronomy of what they all are, like the classification and the groups and the families of asteroids, and that might be helpful to understand
Mm-hmm.
first, maybe. This isn't that related, so if you listen to this first, it's not the end of the world, but that might be a good place to start.
Just for some
Um,
context. And also, if
yeah,
you are
some
just like,
context.
why are they even talking about asteroids? We also have an Asteroids 101 episode we released about
Correct.
2 years ago that it's like, why are asteroids even important to astrologers? So there's
Yeah.
definitely some good resources if you're just jumping in and you're like, why? Why
Yeah.
do the asteroids matter?
Yeah. And I've just found some crazy, crazy things. And yeah, I really want to start sharing some more of this data. And I'm super excited for the book to be done so soon. And um, yeah. So, one of the biggest things I wrote myself a note to actually start here. If you're looking for a specific asteroid, a lot of them were named in Europe or discovered in Europe and named by Germans. So sometimes the spelling of the asteroids are not what you would expect them to be. A lot of
Mm,
C's are actually K's, and There's just a lot of that. And so there's been multiple times where I've been surprised somebody didn't have an asteroid, but then I've changed the spelling from an
Mm,
A to an O or a C to a K, and all of a sudden they did have an asteroid. So I just want to say that. And I have been like pretty good about writing that in the book, like saying like here's how we spell their name, but like here's how the asteroid is spelled.
mm,
But like asteroid Electra, we typically spell it with a C and the asteroid is with a K. So there's and like Cassandra is with a K, not
mm-hmm.
a C.
Okiro, I
Um,
think, was also, I mean, Okiro's already spelled so weird, but I remember when we did that episode, I had to
yeah.
like double check I was spelling it correct in relation to how the asteroid is named.
Yes. Well, Okiro is often spelled both ways, with a
Mm,
C sometimes, with a K sometimes, but usually with
mhm,
a K, but yeah. But there's a lot of that. So I
mhm.
did want to remember to point that out too. Like if you are having a difficult time finding somebody, just try spelling their name differently. There's
Which
been so many times where I've just like retyped their name and found it.
also just feels very in line with the vibe of working with asteroids because so many asteroids connect
Yeah.
us to mythic stories and so many myths have
Right.
multiple tellings and it's not like historically like okay what actually did happen in the Trojan War because like there's no evidence the Trojan War actually
Yeah.
happened. It's a
Right.
mythic story and depending on who told it or how you orient yourself it can have a different perspective and relate to your life in different ways, which is one reason I love working with myth is because it is so open ended and there's just
Right.
so many ways to interact with it. So the fact that even the spelling of asteroids is
Mm-hmm.
open ended is very fitting. And then
Yeah.
also, this is a whole other episode about like names of asteroids, because you
Yeah.
can look up like lovers or like your husband or your children and see if their names have asteroids and where they are in your chart. But you can
Mm-hmm.
also use this logic with that because, like, there's no Alicia asteroid, but there is an Alice asteroid, which is what everyone in Spanish speaking countries calls me anyway, because they think my name's Alice and that I've
Yeah.
translated it, even though my name is Alicia. And so, like, when I was looking up my name in my daughter's chart, I looked up Alice, which is actually conjunct her Venus in Libra, and I'm a Libra rising. So that's cute. But yeah, so there's a lot you can do with the names of asteroids, and you don't have to be
Yeah.
like Virgo perfect specific about it.
Yeah. And like switching genders to like Roberta
Yes.
instead of Robert or
Uh-huh.
and like even so I ended up adding a bunch of like philosophers and thinkers into the book recently because I decided why not give myself more work constantly?
Saturn in Aquarius.
Literally. I keep wondering why I'm going insane. Um but I ended up adding Galileo and his asteroid is actually Galilea. And but
Okay.
it's named after him. Right, correct. So like yeah, there's just so many things like that I'm finding or that I've found over and over. So yeah, if you're not finding something perfect, like my name doesn't have an asteroid either, but Lori etymology wise does stem from the laurel tree. Most L names do, so I just use laurel. So yeah, I think that's a great kind of place to start. So, I want to talk about, at least in this episode, we'll probably make this a series because I have like a 6-page document of fun facts I've bullet pointed that I've been copy pasting from. Oh, it's an 8-page document, actually. Great.
Mm.
Um, so, I have a lot of fun facts that I've been collecting. So, I think today I want to focus more so on the four goddesses and kind of like how they got their names and kind of a reiteration of like why they are so important because we made that episode about 2 years ago when we talked about the goddesses, but I have actually gotten like it's funny. I think since I've moved into my 10th house perfection year, which is Aries for me, where my moon is, I've gotten very protective and angry about women. And like, and I like almost want to fight everybody that Ceres should be a planet now. Like that's been my newest thing that I just want to get in a fight about it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, very
Which we
Aries.
have a whole podcast episode of
She's
what
in
are the
Aries right now
asteroids.
too, isn't she? I think she is.
Yeah.
That's funny.
Well, yeah,
She's
because she's gonna
transiting
be in
Aries.
Taurus soon. There's gonna be a really cute like Venus series in
That's very
Taurus in
cute.
April. But
Yes.
But we have a whole episode of why the four asteroid goddesses, Ceres,
Yes.
Vesta, Juno, and Pallas Athena, why they should be treated as planets.
Right.
So
So I'm going to give you another reason why they should be treated as planet. Anyway, um, okay, so the goddesses were discovered. Okay, Ceres was discovered on January 1st of 1801. And basically the very beginning of the 18th cent or the 1800s, Ceres was discovered. They considered her a planet. They were very impressed by so much of the qualifications that she has that a lot of planets actually don't even have. There's life discovered on Ceres. There is so much to say about
which,
Ceres.
she's Demeter, she's Persephone's mom,
Yeah,
she's the
she's
goddess of
literally the goddess of
agriculture, of
agriculture.
plants, and so that's beautiful that there's life on
It's so
her.
cool.
Okay.
It's so cool.
I also have Ceres conjunct ascendant, so I just love Ceres.
Yeah, I love her. She's so big too.
Hmm.
Um, so anyway, a year later, Pallas was discovered. And then Juno was discovered in 1804, and then Vesta was discovered in 1807. So they discovered the four goddesses, named them after the goddesses, the sisters of the brothers who have planets. Let's reiterate that a million times. I'm
Yeah,
going to
because
just keep
the
saying that.
Olympians, right? We have Jupiter, who's Zeus. We have
Yes.
Neptune, who's Poseidon, and then we have Pluto, who's ambiguously is not a planet, is Hades, and they all have planets. And then yeah, the three sisters, Demeter and Vesta or Hestia and
Hesiod.
Hera or Juno are asteroids. Yes, like it's
Yeah.
and also, if you
Yeah.
ever watch Chaos on Netflix, they have the three Olympian brothers, and then the only sister that they have as a character
Hera.
is Hera, just as like Zeus's wife, and then they don't even give Hestia or Demeter like any attention. So it's like, yeah,
Right.
there's such a bias towards the like
There's
male
such a
Olympians
bias.
even today, which makes sense because Greece was very patriarchal,
It was.
and our we live in modern day America, which is also very patriarchal. So.
Yeah. Yeah. But no, I mean, this stuff gets crazy. And like, actually, when I deep dove into this, because I taught a class a couple months ago on like, this stuff, like on the astronomy and the asteroids and all of this. And I am going to redo that class over the summer at some point. I'm not sure when, but I am going to redo it. But when I was prepping for that class, I like really did a deep dive into the four goddesses. And yeah, I discovered that they were considered planets for 50 years.
And then they lost their planet status.
Yes. So let's talk about why
Interesting.
that is.
Hmm.
Okay, so no other asteroids or anything was discovered for 38 years after Vesta. So basically, Ceres was born in 1801 and up until Vesta in 1807. So in that 6 year span, they discovered the four goddesses, and then 38 years go by and nothing. But then Astraea, who is the fifth asteroid, and technically the first real asteroid, because the four goddesses do have qualities that consider them dwarf planets, not planets, or not asteroids, technically. So Astraea would be the first real asteroid that was discovered. She was discovered in December of 1845, and then that was the same year that they started to realize how many asteroids there were. They hadn't been technically discovered and named yet, but were finding them. They were seeing them, and they realized that if they continued to consider all of them planets, it was just going to get out of hand quickly. So they decided they were probably going to demote the goddess asteroids to dwarf planets rather than planets, and that maybe they would revisit it, but that was when they got demoted. And then it was a year later in 1846 that Neptune was discovered. So this happened 50 years before Neptune. Let's like let
Hmm.
that sink in.
Although Neptune
Because
is also huge
huge. Right,
compared to the asteroids. But
right,
yeah,
right.
they're older than Neptune
They're older
from
than
how
Neptune.
aware we are of them, at least.
Correct. So They discovered Neptune in 1846, and Pluto wasn't even discovered for another 100 years after that. He was
Hmm.
discovered in 19 something.
I think it's the
Um,
1930s because I always
Something
just
like
like
that.
Mercury's in Pisces, so we're on all these like
Yeah.
tangents.
I didn't
As we
write down the year
record
for him.
this, when we release this, Mercury will not be in Pisces anymore. But one way I work with Pluto a lot is that it was discovered around the time that the nuclear bomb was
Yes.
invented, and so Pluto transits, or if you have a strong Pluto in your chart, can lead to like nuclear experiences or nuclear fights or it's a very nuclear planet energetically with astrology. So
Yes.
I think it's 1930s is
It
when it was
is.
discovered.
Yeah, it's like, yeah, I think mid to late 30s or early 40s, because it
Yeah.
was about 100 years after Neptune.
Hmm.
Um, So then, after Pluto was discovered, he was a planet for about 50 years as well. And then they realized he actually showed more similarities to the goddesses and the dwarf planets rather than the actual planets. So there was actually a really big fight that broke out where they really wanted to continue to use Pluto as a planet, especially astrologers at this point have really grown connected to Pluto. But even astrologers were using Ceres as a planet in that 50-year span that happened. So I think that's really important to note that literally they ended up demoting Pluto because they realized if they were going to consider Pluto a planet, then they actually had to consider the four goddesses planets. And that is the only
Hmm.
reason Pluto's not a planet.
Hmm. Interesting.
So let's get angry. Um, like God forbid a woman be a planet. Um,
Besides Venus. But
yeah,
it's like,
besides,
because Demetra talks about this with like how we need the asteroids because like traditional
yes,
astrology, especially from the ancient world, like the only roles that women can play are as a moon or as Venus, like you're either the
right,
mother
the
or the
lover or the
lover. And so
mother.
then when you have, and again, we've talked about this in our episodes about the asteroid goddesses, but they
Yes,
invite in so many different feminine archetypes that all of us may embody to regardless of our sex or gender, a Pallas type person is very different than a Ceres type person, and the mothering of Ceres is different than the mothering of the moon, and it just brings in so much more
yeah.
complexity as opposed to just like Venus and the moon and just like these two roles that women can play by an astrological system that didn't even acknowledge women were really humans in ancient Greece, and
Right.
so yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And so after 1845, they started to pick up how rapidly they were discovering asteroids. And basically by the 1900s, they were finding them left and right. And they're still being named and found today so rapidly. So, what's interesting is when they first started discovering the asteroids and the minor planetary bodies, because of this whole fight with Pluto breaking out and like so many other things, they even back then had decided that they were going to name them all after women and after goddesses, which is really
Mm.
interesting that there were a couple of high ups in the like I guess in NASA, like the astronomers who really fought for this. They like really insisted that the goddess have a representation and that they refused to name any asteroids after men.
Mm.
For a really long time, actually. They kept this going for a while. And for a while, they had decided they all had to be named after goddesses or prominent deities. Um, until Eugenia, who is asteroid number 45, and she was the first non-mythical person to be named. But she was still like a queen of Egypt. And she actually, this is so funny. And since we're doing fun facts anyway, I'm just going to share this. But
Hmm.
the day that I edited her was the day before the Louvre heist happened.
Mm.
And it was her stuff that got stolen from the Louvre.
Mm.
And since I had just edited her and then I saw, I was meeting with a client and I was telling her about this, and she really resonated with her story. So we ended up spending a lot of time talking about Eugenia, because I had made a TikTok about it that she commented on. And she was like, wait a minute, that name sounds really familiar. And it turned out it was her crowned jewels that were stolen from the Louvre. So we looked up Asteroid Louvre and Asteroid Eugenia, and they were both prominent in the chart of the moment for the Louvre heist.
That's really
Um,
cool.
so yeah, I don't remember where exactly they were, but I do have the screenshot of that chart somewhere. So I did think that was really funny. I've had a lot of synchronicity like that happen while I've been editing this book. So
Yeah, or even the episode that we recorded on Scylla, and then right before you
yeah,
recorded it, we're like, "Where is Scylla in the sky?" And it was a Scylla Kazemi
conjunct
at
the
that
sun.
moment,
Yeah.
and we're like, "Okay, now we shall
Okay.
talk about her."
Yeah, exactly. That kind of stuff happens so often. And so, yeah, I think Eugenia, so then she was the first non-mythical person, but still they like were really strict about naming them specifically after women. And they really wanted to just give space for the goddess to come through. And then there was another really big fight with Elpis, which I thought was really interesting. So Elpis was asteroid number 59. And so she was pretty close to this. And a huge fight broke out with Elpis. So the discoverer wanted to name her Elpis. And if you're unfamiliar with that story, so Pandora, who I believe is asteroid
Mm.
60, I have all of them memorized at this point. Um, my brain is full of asteroid numbers. Um, so Pandora was given her box, and when she's told not to open the box, and then she opens the box, and all of the bad things in the world get let out, she closes the box when there was just one more thing inside, and it was Elpis, and Elpis is the personification of hope. And Elpis is such an interesting one that I actually want to do an episode on as well, just because, like, was Hope inherently bad? Is that why she was in the box in the first place? Like, there's so many
Mm.
different facets I think you can go down with that story. Um, but Elpis, Hope, literally starts this huge fight because he wanted to name it Elpis, and it got a lot of pushback. And some of them said they no longer wanted to keep the asteroids being named after female deities. They wanted to open it up to anything. But then some of the higher ups actually completely disagreed, and they were like, no, we're giving women a voice. And they really fought for this archetype to continue to be powerful, strong, dominant women, and that they wanted representation for the female archetypes. And it was men that fought this, and this was in the 1800s. So, like, shocking,
Yeah,
actually, that this
yeah.
happened. And they ended up ultimately all agreeing on it and continuing to name them all after powerful women or deities or goddesses. The next one after Elpis that started a fight, this is one of my other favorite fun facts. I think this one's so funny. But asteroid Miriam, who's asteroid 102, she caused a ton of naming controversy as well because they were all being named after goddesses, but he wanted to name this one after a mythical figure from the Jewish Bible tradition, like the biblical. And this was like not a thing back then. At this point, I've actually been including a lot of biblical figures in the book and doing a pretty deep dive into like as many as I can possibly find. So there are a lot of biblical figures, but Miriam was the first to be named for any biblical tradition of any religion. And she's part of the Jewish tradition, pantheon. I don't know what to call it. Um, and the So he basically did this because he had this professor who he thought was like overly pious and like just this theology professor who he like really didn't like, who was an acquaintance of his, and they were in this really big fight. And he basically was just like, you know what? I'm gonna name this after a biblical figure to show that there are also myth. Basically, was his argument is like the Bible figures from Jewish or Christian tradition are mythic. And
Mm.
this like really pissed this guy off. And he was like, no, she was a real woman. And they like ended up getting this giant fight, but they ultimately ended up letting him keep Asteroid Miriam 102. And Hera is actually 103. So I
Mm.
think it's actually really interesting where she is because like the early hundreds are there's so much to be said about like those characters, and Helen is 101. So she's like
Mm.
sandwiched between these like really powerful women. Um, and Hecate, also, she's one of my favorite fun facts too. The word hecaton in Greek means 100. So they saved asteroid 100 for Hecate because
Mm.
they wanted to name her after her like namesake of being 100. So she's the 100th asteroid that was discovered. And so it is just like really funny that Miriam just kind of slid in with all of these like really prominent women in Greek
Yeah.
myth and just like made her way through just because of this like giant fight about religion that had broken out. And most of the early ones were Greek. There's very few, like Isis is 42. Like Isis was one of the earlier ones, but not very many of different pantheons really made their way into the naming until later. And Endymion, who's asteroid 342, he was actually the first male deity that was ever
Mm.
named. And so they made it to almost 350 without naming a single deity male, which I think is actually like really impressive. Um, and they were still sticking to the gods and goddesses that energy, but they did end up opening it up after Endymion, which did start another fight. Um, but they basically allowed him to be named, and then after that, they kind of just opened it up to be named anything.
Yeah,
At
because now
one
there's
point,
like a beer asteroid and
right.
like just all these random, yeah.
Yeah, there's so many at this point, and they eventually stopped fighting because they were like, well, okay,
There's
there's
a million
literally a million
asteroids.
asteroids and there's 28,000 that have names, and so they decided to stop fighting the fight and just like allowing anything to be named at that point. Um,
Which, in the astronomy of asteroids episode, we talk about how knowing the astronomy of a specific asteroid can really open you up to reflecting on how that asteroid might show up in your personal life, especially if it's an asteroid that's prominent in your chart. And also, same with like the naming, right? If you have Miriam prominent in your chart, the politics around how Miriam was named might have something to say about like your life experience, maybe with like debates about religion or, so there's a
right,
lot of
right.
things that can come in with everything relating to these asteroids. And also, I don't know if
Hmm.
we mentioned it specifically in this episode, we've said it in others, but the way an asteroid is named is whichever astronomer discovers the asteroid then gets the privilege of naming it. So just
Yeah.
to put that out there for folks who didn't know that.
Yeah, yeah. And so, now it's just a free for all. Like a lot of asteroids are named after themselves or their
Mm-hmm.
children or their wife or whoever.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I'm actually very impressed the deeper I went into it, like they really committed to the feminine deities for a
Mm-hmm.
really long time. And then they like, yeah, didn't name one after a male deity until 342. And then it wasn't until I forget who was the first like just like man that was named, but it was like way later also. So I do think it's cool that they did really commit to that for a long time.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, well,
yeah.
and I feel like even just continuing on with like an analysis of where do women and women, like female archetypes and feminine archetypes, show up astrologically, it's even
Yeah.
making me think of like Audre Lorde's essay, The Master's Tools Will Not Dismantle the Master's House. And like maybe we don't need to have a bunch of woman planets. Like maybe it is cool to have like this
Hmm.
entirely different world within astrology where that's where we're exploring different
Right.
feminine archetypes and it's an entirely different structure. Like we don't need to
Right.
like replicate the existing structures. We can create new ones that allow for a lot more space for different feminine expressions and um so maybe it is how it should be that
Yeah.
like the asteroids are where you find a lot of the different feminine archetypes.
Yeah.
And
I
we don't
love
need to have a
that.
hierarchy of saying like planets are more important than asteroids. It doesn't have to be like one is prioritized more than the other. It's easier to work with the planets because there's
Yeah.
30,000 named asteroids, but yeah, so.
Yeah, but I think like when I first started writing this book, before it was decided it was going to be a book, when it was just a resource that I was collecting my own data, my own findings, my own placements, stories that I found, just like I was collecting everything in a document. And when I first started doing that, I really was drawn to it and connected to it because I felt like something was missing when it came to astrology in general, especially because
Hmm.
it kind of coincided when I got really into asteroids is when I started studying Hellenistic astrology. And it just felt very masculine, very patriarchal. And I just grew up that, I mean, we all did. We grew up that way, being like really like pushed and forced these narratives. And I've just been noticing it more and more how outdated a lot of this way of thinking is. And I didn't love that the moon and Venus were the only two feminine archetypes that we had as women to lean into. And it just, something didn't sit right in me with that. And I felt like there had to be more. And the more I looked into it, and then I found the asteroid goddesses and then discovered that there were actually hundreds of other goddesses and deities from all pantheons, from so many stories. And, and as I've been editing too, like I was just talking to a friend about this the other day, like Psyche is the only story that has like a happy ending, I think, of like all Greek myths. And I like of all Greek women, let's say.
Mm,
Um, and that's like probably not fully true, but I just was like, why is she the only positive goddess? Like, why is she the only one who has a
hmm.
happy ending that's not just a
Yeah,
man?
I mean, the
And it like is a
Greeks were
man, but
sexist. Like the Greeks
so much
hated
so.
women. Yeah.
Well, and when you really like think back, it's like the rich white men in power were the ones who had the ability to read and write, and they were the ones who got to have the final decision of writing down these myths and sharing them with the world. And so everything that we have today that's been preserved isn't necessarily what the women, the grandmothers, were telling their kids around a campfire. What we have is what the men have decided they
Hmm.
wanted to preserve and keep alive and keep the stories. So who knows how many of these stories are actually what they originally were. And and I think about this a lot with palettes. Like, there's so many stories where Athena is the bad guy and just like is turning women into like her story with Medusa. Like, just so much of it doesn't resonate with me at all. And it just like kind of
Yeah.
upsets me. And I just feel like that's not who she actually was, especially as a person
Hmm.
who has Palace 2 degrees from my son. Like, that just doesn't resonate. And Hera, like always just seeing Hera as the jealous
Yes.
wife of Zeus, like
Yeah.
it doesn't, there's more to these women. And I think the asteroids are doing a really good job of showing that there's so much more richness to feminine energies.
Hmm.
And, even though most of them are negative stories or tragedies or whatever, they still can be looked at in a modern lens, and we can still
Yes.
see how they're showing up, and we can still work with their energies and rewrite their stories and keep them alive and
Yes.
tell their stories. And I
Exactly.
think the asteroids for me is like how I'm doing that, or like
Hmm.
how I wanted to keep them alive and how I wanted to see them in modern ways show up. And I'm just blown away every single day at these deities I've never even heard of that I edit, that I just like see so loudly in my chart and other people's. And it's like crazy that these ancient stories are still relevant after so
Yes.
many years.
Yeah, it is amazing how, or, even like the house system and the life topics that are divided into the 12 houses, and how most of those topics are still incredibly relevant today, even though that system was developed over 2,000 years ago. And it's
Yeah.
like a lot of the same core experiences of being a human on this planet are the same no matter what time or place or culture you live
Yeah.
in. And then, yeah, there's a lot of really exciting things we can do in modern life in modern times to like rewrite these stories and add more dimension. And again, that's why myth is so powerful, is there's not just one right story. There's a million different orientations depending on like what your orientation is and where you are situated and what
Yeah.
your perspectives are. And that's why I always bring up Madeline Miller, is I just love her books
Hmm.
and the work that she's done in like reimagining Greek myth, like Circe, right? Who is
Yeah.
another one of these female goddesses who's just depicted in such a negative light. And then
So
Madeline
much.
Miller just gives her, like really opens up her internal world in her book,
Yeah.
Circe. And
Well,
it's like
and
we can all be doing work like that. And even just exploring your own chart. Like I have Adonis on my ascendant, who's like a very gender queer being. So
hmm
not a woman in Greek myth, but still like gender
yeah.
marginalized in their own way. It's like, what does it mean? Like, I see Adonis as a ski bum in my life, right? So it's like we can really bring these mythic beings to life in really special ways through our own lived experiences.
Yeah. And so many of these women got villainized as
Yeah.
well. Like it's like when you look at somebody like Cersei, it's so easy to be like, oh, she was the crazy witch in isolation. But like that amount of isolation and feeling lonely and feeling exiled can really get to you. And so when you start to
Hmm.
like humanize them and look at them in that way, it's just like, well, yeah, like of course she felt that way. And so much of that gets like written out of the stories that I feel like we
Yeah.
have. And like I have Cersei on my son. And she's one that I think about very frequently. And I've like worked with her a lot. And I also like, yeah, I think there's so much to be said about these exiled women. Um, I want to do an episode on women who get exiled and then have a baby in exile
Mm.
because I have Maya and Leto and like I have so many
Well,
of them
also Cersei.
and Cersei. Yeah, I
Yeah.
have so many of them prominent in my life, in my chart. And I think it's funny that since I've been writing this book, I've like all I've wanted is to be in complete isolation. I've wanted to just like
Mm.
hibernate and like not go out, not talk to people. And I've never felt this way in my life. And I'm like birthing this giant
Yeah,
project and I do think it's just like funny to watch these parallels. Like I'm
it
not
is.
pregnant with an actual baby,
You're
but
undergoing this
it's
huge creative
still,
endeavor. And,
yeah, it's like still a similar energy.
as someone who just had a baby, I also, feeling exiled and feeling isolated is a really, really common experience for new moms and new parents and people like pregnant people. And as you undergo this
Hmm.
huge life transition of becoming a parent, like that can feel like its own exile as well. So, yeah, I feel like that would be a really
Yeah.
evocative episode for us to do.
Yeah, I've been collecting stories like that because I have so
Mm,
many of them and I keep finding
yeah.
them too. I'm like, oh, there's another.
Yeah.
Um,
Okay, well, we should wrap up
yeah.
because speaking of babies, I have to feed mine. Um,
Yes.
but we'll
Uh,
be back with more fun facts episodes. And as always, if you have any fun facts about
yeah.
asteroids or if any of this like lit up anything for you or you have any reflections or questions, like please
Yeah.
comment,
I
please
want
reach
to
out to our
start
Instagram.
I want to start doing a series too of like, yes, the fun facts, but also like short stories. Like I have
Hmm.
collected a ton of asteroid stories that like don't need its own whole episode.
That could be like
Like
a YouTube short too. We could start
that's
exploring with
true. We
that
could do that.
platform.
But yeah, it's like these stories that don't need like a whole hour and a half and the other person being interviewed, but it's just like I had a client that came to me asking if she should buy a brewery. So we pulled Asteroid beer in a bunch of her timing charts and like
Hmm.
things like
Yeah.
that. Like I have so many stories like that where it's just like very quick. So
Yeah, and that it's just so fun with asteroids because the first asteroid was discovered in 1801, not a lot of astrologers are like more and more astrologers are starting to
yeah.
work with asteroids, but it's like we get to kind of create the techniques as we go along and
Yeah,
experiment with
we're
what
kind of
works, which
pioneering
is
it.
very, very fun. So,
Very fun.
thanks for tuning in, and we'll be back soon with some more fun facts. Thank you so much for joining us today. If you have any personal stories to share or thoughts and reflections about what we discussed in this episode, please comment down below or reach out to us on Instagram. And please come follow us on Instagram at ConversationsWPlanets, where we share forecasts and updates about the astrological movements happening in the sky, as well as updates about our episodes. The link to our Instagram is in the show notes down below.